How's everyone doing today? Enjoying Prague? It's a beautiful city. It's my first time to Europe, so I'm enjoying my time here. Today, we're going to be covering what Bitcoin miners do, what is Bitcoin mining, getting down to the fundamentals, because you come to a conference like this and you can gloss over some things, and when you do things like that, you have some misconceptions and you can have misunderstandings, and it's always important to get back to the fundamentals. We'll go over the common misconceptions and then talk about the benefits of Bitcoin mining, particularly how Bitcoin miners benefit the grid and incentivize the build out of sustainable energy infrastructure. So to start it out, I'm joined by these panelists here. Do you guys you want to give them a background as far as your introduction, your background, and how you're involved in Bitcoin mining?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Alexander Neumueller, and I lead the research for digital asset energy and climate impact at the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance. We have been in the space for quite some time, so I have been a Bitcoin miner at some point in my life myself, and kind of this passion led to, and some kind of a long history of studies led to me joining the center. Our center has been looking into the space for now since I think 2016-17, where we wrote the first report on the crypto kind of asset space more broadly, but at some point it crystallized out that Bitcoin specifically is very interesting from the energy side. There was a lot of kind of public demand for data in that regard, and we did a lot of theoretical modeling around electricity consumption, emissions, and one of my key goals was to work with industry stakeholders to get better data, right? Because specifically, there's a lot of information you can't just not get on chain. You really need to work with stakeholders like mining pools, like Bitcoin miners directly. And long story short, I think this year in April, we published a report on Bitcoin and on digital mining specifically, where we nearly captured, I think, about close to half the entire global network hash rate. And I think that was really kind of a milestone in terms of data collection in that regard.
It was a big milestone. I think everyone was really excited by that research when it came out.
Yeah, I hope so. I think it took a long time to get this done, because naturally you need to speak with each individual stakeholder, but we also were quite frankly very humbled and overwhelmed by the support we received from the community to actually pull this off, because ultimately this is only possible if you kind of get the input from the kind of mining firms, right? And so I'm talking for a long time with the Bitcoin Mining Council, for instance, but also a lot of other stakeholders. And in the end, I hope that it was helpful to get the most contemporary data possible.
My name's Susie. I'm the CEO of Bitcoin Policy UK and the Bitcoin Journalist, and I write about mining. I try and research it and reach out to miners like you guys so I can tell your stories, because we know that there's a lot of misconceptions, and you've been working on this as well. So it's trying to dispel the FUD and say that it doesn't boil the oceans. It is actually good for the environment, and we need to actually integrate it into our energy systems. So I try and write about that and educate people so they're not so scared of it.
Hi, Jānis here from Power Mining. We come from the side of infrastructure manufacturing for Bitcoin miners. So everything that comes with starting from the electricity to actually deployments on the site. And we've been doing that since 2017, mostly in Europe. And we've seen the space develop so far now since the day one that it was a shady industry, complicated, not understandable, not transparent. Now the technology is coming in, we are getting better. We're doing the heat reuse projects in Scandinavia, which brings that huge impact to also the society. And basically they would be using the energy anyways, and now it's just a Bitcoin in between. So the benefits we start feeling as a society are here, and I think also the next big wave of Bitcoin mine development will be probably something smaller scale, more scattered, more decentralized, and mostly because of the European Union policy of supporting green energy. Therefore, creating lots of abundance in electricity.
Yeah, let's hope that's the case. I mean, you could probably go to a couple other panels and hear something else, but yeah, that's the idea here. And then I'm Billy with Simple Mining. We're a Bitcoin mining company based in Iowa. we help investors get profitable exposure to Bitcoin mining through owning an ASIC and contributing hash, supporting a pool, mining blocks, all of that kind of stuff. And a lot of what I do in my job is educating clients and people that have these misconceptions in their head about, oh, Bitcoin mining does this, or Bitcoin is this way. And actually, no, that's not the case. If you spend some time researching and studying, you can understand, wow, it's actually the opposite, and it's benefiting the legacy systems that are going to get replaced by something that can absorb all the wasted energy that's out there. So to start it out, just as far as like, we all work in the Bitcoin mining industry, and I'm sure many of you have people come up to you and they say, oh, Bitcoin mining, like I've heard of that thing at $100,000 the other day. It's really getting up there. But what is Bitcoin mining? Like, what do Bitcoin miners do? And I'm sure over time, like as you answer that question, you started to form like a response to that to effectively communicate it in a succinct manner to where people can understand it. And at least me personally, one of the things that when I first came into Bitcoin and started to understand it, it was computers solving complex math problems. I'm sure many of you guys have heard that, and it's far more nuanced. It's actually not as nuanced as that. It's just computers guessing numbers to try to find a winning number. It's not that crazy. I mean, what would you guys say is your go-to response? Somebody comes up to you, what is Bitcoin? Like, what is a Bitcoin miner? What do you tell them?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to start, and let me give a bit of, I don't want to be too boring, but a bit of history, and then I'll let the industry expert explain possibly proof of work. But essentially, how I start is, I think what Satoshi invented was a combination of a lot of different research historically, a lot of getting back to the 90s, where we started with, okay, how can we, for instance, deter email spam, like requiring some sort of effort, and that's what's computational effort that doesn't bother you if you send an email, because you might have a couple of seconds lag. But if you want to send like millions of emails, 100,000 of emails, it's going to cost you a lot of computational power. And the other idea was this cryptographically linked chains that go also back to the 90s, and essentially it was really a combination of a lot of different research. And the goal, what Satoshi solved then, was putting some crypto-economic incentive mechanism on the top of it. That is kind of the mining incentive.
Hold your mic a little bit closer.
Okay, sorry. And the goal is really, you are in a net, kind of, we call it distributed consensus, which means you need to make sure that we all can agree on one truth, but no one is trusting each other, right? And this was, I think, the main issue that mining kind of solved, because it requires you to be able to participate, or at least participate with a reasonable chance of getting anything, to spend resources, right? In that sense, it is hardware, it is energy specifically, so you have some sort of like CapEx cost, you have OpEx cost that allows you to essentially participate. And if you don't have that, and if you just want to spend like nonsense, then you just get ignored by other nodes. And I'm gonna pause right here and give the words to the other as well.
What was that?
So I'm gonna pause here so I get the others the chance as well to answer the questions before me.
Susie, I mean, yeah, that was a very elaborate explanation, but yeah, I mean, what would you say? Someone comes to you, Bitcoin mining. What is a Bitcoin miner? What does Bitcoin mining do? What do you tell them?
It's a difficult question to answer, and I like how you called it a special number.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, guessing.
Not
ultimately,
the word that. What is it?
They're just looking. They're guessing a number. I mean, it's not even.
No, sorry, I was joking. I thought you were going to say nonce.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't. We talked about this beforehand. She was like, yeah, don't say the golden nonce in Europe, because apparently it means something very bad.
Not in the UK, at least.
Oh, is it just a UK thing? Is it not the same in Europe?
No, it's a UK thing.
Okay, so I think it's securing a network and connecting money back to energy. Obviously, it's trying to find a special number, but I don't think that explains it to anybody. So if you are actually explaining Bitcoin mining, I think it's just a way of securing a global network that's a peer-to-peer cash that connects any energy back to money through hashing.
Alex, thank you. But to my friends and people who ask me that question, I try to avoid a long answer. So just keep it short on my side. You get a miner, a small miner, big miner, whatever, you are part of the bank, and you may get something and you may not. So it's, if you want to read about it, look up Google and something like that. So,
hold your mic close.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
But anyways, regarding mining, may I jump in about the BitX story a bit?
We can go in that direction eventually. I mean, just like recapping what we talked about, at least one of the things that helped me personally with understanding mining is going back to like when Bitcoin started, what mining originally was. And I think you touched on this a little bit, but it was like on a personal computer. A personal computer was a Bitcoin miner, it was a Bitcoin wallet, and it was a Bitcoin node. And now, like, it can be confusing for people because now all of those roles have compartmentalized into all the people, the 20,000 people roughly around the world that are running a Bitcoin node, and the millions of ASIC miners, and there's the BitX miners, and there's all the miners around the world that are contributing hash, and then you factor in the mining pool section, and that's another thing to be thinking about. And then there's all of the wallets out there. You can have multi-sig wallets, you can have hot wallets, you can have cold wallets, you can have the signing devices. There's all these things that get involved, but that's how it originally started. It was a genius developer, whoever Satoshi was, and he had a computer, and the computer was a wallet, the computer was a node, and the computer was a miner. And that's far more simple than the situation that we have today. But yeah, I mean, we can shift into the misconception. Like I just mentioned all of those areas of Bitcoin mining, and that is like the breeding ground for misunderstanding and people being like, okay, well, there's this aspect of Bitcoin mining, and there's this industry. Like, how does all this fit together? And then the mainstream media tries to interpret it, and they see something crazy, they do some weird math and say, well, Bitcoin mining uses the same amount of electricity as entire countries, and it's going to consume everybody's electricity 20 years from now, and just coming up with all these crazy ideas and theories. When, I mean, currently right now, Bitcoin mining uses 0.5% of global energy consumption, and it doesn't, I don't know if anybody has seen the video with Pierre Rochard when he was at Riot. He goes around with the little carbon sensor, and he goes up to all the miners, and he's like, wow, 0 carbon emitting. I'm outside, and we can see it's at 0, and he goes inside the mining facility, and he holds it next to the miners, and he's like, wow, even right next to the fan, there's 0 carbon emitting from this Bitcoin miner. And it's just crazy how somehow a common misconception like that can get cemented into people's minds, and all it takes is someone to go, well, let me go try this. I'll get a carbon sensor, go put it right up next to an ASIC Bitcoin miner, and what do you know? There's no carbon coming from it. And obviously, there's a lot of other factors that can contribute to it. But as far as all the misconceptions that we're talking about, where it's damaging the environment, it's wasting energy, it's raising the average cost of power for people, many of you are involved in combating this false information. And so if you'd want to, we'll start with you, Alex. The Cambridge Center of Finance, like, you wrote that report. How did you go about dispelling the blatantly false information that was out there?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, what we're trying to do is just provide people with information, so we're not combating anything. We are just trying to provide kind of being a data aggregator, essentially, getting data that is very hard to get. And so to your point, yeah, indeed, there is no emissions directly from mining devices, right? Because it's not a combustion engine, it's essentially just converting electrical power to heat. That's what those machines do. So it's more kind of the indirect emissions that we usually talk about from, you know, electricity consumption. And naturally, that raises the question, and this is kind of the big questions that we ask ourselves a lot, because I think the theoretical modeling for electricity consumption is based on kind of comparing our data that we get from our theoretical model with the data we get from the surveys. It's really, really close. The more difficult part is then trying to convert this into emissions, and this is exactly kind of the reason is that you need to understand kind of the energy mix, or the electricity mix more specifically. And for that, you need to have information on, for instance, where miners are located, or direct information of what kind of electricity mix miners are using. And I think that is when, to your point about kind of misinformation, where you see a lot of different research in that regard, specifically when it comes to the determination of the electricity mix. If you rely on, there is something called the greenhouse gas protocol, and there are specific kind of methods where you can, for instance, account for a company's electricity mix. And one of those is a so-called location-based assessment. So how that works is essentially you need to get an understanding of where mining firms are located and then use pretty much the grid mix, right? They're as granular as it gets, but mostly it's the national grid mix. And I think that is a lot of where this difference is coming from, because mining is simply an ultra-competitive business, and it gets more and more competitive, specifically as we move along each and every halving. So miners have a clear incentive to find kind of stranded energy, and that may be fossil fuels, for instance, when it comes to otherwise routinely flared natural gas, vented gas, even for landfills, and naturally stranded renewables from wind energy to hydropower, depending on the region, right? Because in many cases you have a lot of overbuilding, build a huge hydropower plant, for instance, but there's just not the local demand to actually, make sense to run all the turbines. And this is where, for instance, miners could come in and say, hey, well, we might be this consumer, we can do this behind the meter, we don't need any expensive grid adjustments, right? So we connect kind of, we have the substation, we connect to your substation, and that's kind of how it works. We don't need to go with the grid and make it really congested. So, but to a long story short, essentially, I think what we're trying to do is not necessarily combating misinformation, but what we try to do is work with a lot of different stakeholders to collect the information necessary to make informed opinions.
Yeah, get to the source, like what is the energy that Bitcoin miners are actually using?
Exactly.
And that brings you to the question of they're not wasting energy, they're saving energy that would have otherwise been wasted. And that's like when the flip, or like it switches in your head, it's the other case. And maybe Susie, if you want to shed light on how you've interacted with BBC and what they've published and the information there, and what the strategy that you have taken to clear the air and say, hey, this is where the truth is at.
Yeah, most journalists, including, it's not just the BBC, it's all of them. And you can look at it because there's a really brilliant website called Bitcoin Perception, and you can actually see if all the mainstream articles are either negative, positive, or neutral. And you can see across all the mainstream articles that have been written across the Times, the Guardian, etc., that they're largely negative, with a very small amount of balance and hardly any positive. But we know that that's not true, because we know all the amazing things that Bitcoin mining do. So why is it that they're not writing about them? So the one article that really got to me was when you were talking about how they kind of do their research. They don't. They just pick a lazy
whole country. It uses as much as a whole country, and it's just like these false analogies that you come up with in your head. Like, it's a meaningless comparison. That's like, we wouldn't compare how many people are at this conference with all the people that went to lunch in another state, or some ridiculous notion like that.
Yeah, or fairy lights, or washing machines. It depends what you value putting energy into. And so if you think that using energy to secure a global peer-to-peer network that's never been hacked and has 99.9% uptime, I think that that's a really good use of energy. So I took the BBC, or tried to hold them accountable, for an article that they wrote that every Bitcoin payment uses a swimming pool's worth of water. Do you remember that article?
Yeah, it was not my work, but I remember it.
You remember it? And the source was Alex de Vries, who was a Dutch central banker who had been discredited. You've probably come across him as well, haven't you, quite a lot? Alex de Vries.
Yeah, I don't know him personally, but...
He's a menace.
I am not commenting on the work of other researchers.
So he got discredited in 2018. He's a Dutch central banker, so he has a vested interest because he knows that Bitcoin's going to disseminate banks.
Do you think that's like one of the problems would be a lot of the funding? You could dive pretty deep on it, but a lot of the funding that's going into the research that's providing information on a topic like Bitcoin mining is directly undermining the fiat system and the central bank. So why would they want to provide clear-cut educational information on Bitcoin mining, the system that's in, you could say that Bitcoin is direct competition with the fiat system and the central bank. And I think many central bankers who they've built their wealth and everything they have is the Cantillon effect, being close to the money printer, then ultimately you're not going to want to tell people the truth about Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining.
So their jobs rely on them not understanding it, essentially. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, if you ultimately just follow the money, like they have they have incentives and they have jobs and they have titles.
So it's kind of worse than that as well, because we know that Bitcoin is proof of work, and we know that the other altcoins are mostly proof of stake. So without understanding the difference between proof of work and proof of stake, I found quite a few reports that were written by altcoins, I'll use the polite word, that were funding their own research to actually prove that proof of stake was more environmentally friendly than proof of work. And it was traceable. You could actually prove it. You could prove that they were funding their own reports, which were then feeding into legislation. The whole thing is corrupt. They have no incentives because there's so much money there, but there's no money in Bitcoin necessarily. I mean, it's number go up technology, but...
I mean, it's like the thing with Ripple where they created the big Satoshi skull, and
Yeah.
it's just like this thing that's embodying like Bitcoin is this destructive technology that's like turning everything in a dystopian place. And then it shows up at the Bitcoin conference in Vegas, and it's like a meme. And then you see David Bailey shaking hands with the CEO of Ripple, where now it's just like a joke. Like, we know that Bitcoin mining's not bad, so you guys can use it as a relic in your museum to back in the times where people thought that Bitcoin mining was bad for the environment.
It's not a joke what he did, though. I mean, you can connect Chris Larsen to an anti-Bitcoin campaign in Riot in Texas. You can actually follow the money and see that Chris Larsen, who had a vested interest in wanting to see Ripple succeed, gave £5 million, which then went to fund Change the Code, which then went on to fund the Crypto Coalition against crypto mining, which then went to directly protest against Riot in Texas. There's an actual train of, it's connectable. You can connect the dots. And so I think he should have actually said sorry. I don't think it's good enough, actually, to just be laughing about it.
Yeah, I would agree with you to some extent there. And I mean, it's the fiat-minded hierarchy does not want to be unseated very easily. So they're going to do whatever they can to not become easily unseated. And I think transitioning to you, Jānis, to get you into the conversation, we're talking about like,
I'm listening to people who are smarter, so I'm curious about this.
We're talking about like writing these reports that are going to inform companies and these news publications and the more institutional commercial level of spreading the right information. But if you go all the way down to the individual and the average Joe investor and anybody out there that just wants to learn for themselves, I think, have a good story on like how can you give people the right information on what Bitcoin mining is and how it is good for the world.
So for the clarity of sake, these people are very smart and they have everything data-based and it's excellent. My background is a bit more on the site visits, actually, and therefore all these good cases they are writing about, I actually have a story, a picture, and a face to it. So all these great projects that have been deployed all across, let's say, Europe, Africa, where they actually bring benefit, I can mention the companies. Let's mention company Gridless. They're doing a great job, and I think public must know this, that the locals couldn't afford electricity because they have low demand. So what Gridless does is actually takes in their miners to take off the load that they cannot afford, thus bringing the local community's electricity price down. So they made a video there where kids are saying, hey, before Bitcoin, I had to do my homework in some, not dusty, but so a dark room. Okay, now after Bitcoin, the families can afford electricity. It's a sad story, but it's true. So Bitcoin actually brings value there. And they started deploying smaller, or building actually smaller power plants, which is also very beneficial. That's Africa only. And then again, as probably the point where you brought me to, is how people start mining or how they can understand it better.
Yeah, I think getting back to like the BitX story that you were talking about earlier.
That I'm eager to tell, right? The BitX project is an open source project by the OSMU community. So non-paid developers created a small Bitcoin miner that anyone can manufacture. And it started with, I think, half a terahash, so quite unpowerful. But now it's stronger. They're using stronger chip, regardless of the chip name. So it's 1.1, 1.2 terahashes roughly. And the cost is very affordable, so like $100 to $150 for a real Bitcoin on-chain miner using the real Bitcoin mining chip. So, and that is the story of BitX, that it's affordable. It's educational. It's good to show kids how Bitcoin mining works. Also, the big Bitcoin miners that have the industrial scale farms at last can show their friends what a Bitcoin miner looks like in real life, not only in a picture or online. So they all like the toy. And the impact of that was way bigger than we thought, because we started manufacturing it this year for our customers as a Christmas gift. So we did like, I don't know, 100 units. Now we have made more than 10,000 within 6 months of time span. So the demand is crazy. So what I did, so for my father, I installed it as a solo mining tool. So basically, if he hits a block, he gets 3.125 Bitcoin.
I think it's in the last 6 months, how many BitX miners off the top of your guys' head have won a Bitcoin block?
I think three. Three were announced.
I don't know specifically.
I think, I heard 2 in the last 6 months, which, I mean, it's a very small percentage of total hash rate. And
so
I think
1 terahash against petahash farms.
Yeah, I mean, these publicly traded mining companies have exahash under management. So, I think that gets into the other point that maybe we could talk about is the BitX is a phenomenal educational tool to like learn about Bitcoin and how it actually works. And you brought up the story about the small village in Africa, but there's a distinction to be made between a very good educational tool and something that's going to move the needle and move the industry forward into the future that we want for Bitcoin mining. And like anybody that looks into mining pools and Bitcoin mining enough, you can see that it's moving in a direction of not being how it was originally, where everybody was just mining Bitcoin on their personal computers and it was the same decentralization per se as nodes. Where now we have 2 mining pools that have over 50% of the network hash rate.
The top 4, I think, make up about 83% as well. It's quite bad.
I mean, it's not decentralized. I mean, I wouldn't say it's decentralized. And so, what do you think bridges us from the educational side of things with the BitX and learning about it to actually changing the centralized nature of where Bitcoin mining is at right now?
There's lots of problems with the Sorry, did I just interrupt you?
No.
Oh, okay. There's lots of problems with the centralization of mining. I think hash rate is a problem. I think geography with hash rate is a problem. Nearly 40% of the hash rates in the US. In the UK, we've got like 0.1 to 0.23%. I think that's terrible. That's not particularly decentralized. Then you've obviously got the mining pools, you've got the hardware, the chips, the templates. There's lots of problems. And I think that home heating is going to be a really good solution, things like BitX. And I think when we start integrating it into anything that uses heat, we can mine Bitcoin with, because 1 kilowatt in is 1 kilowatt out. So if you're not mining Bitcoin with a heater, then it's kind of like a dumb heater. So you might as well be mining Bitcoin. But if everyone had them in their homes, that's when true decentralization will happen.
Yeah, I do like how that's like, it's an incentives game. And so if there is no incentive to run a node, or which there's not really at this point in time, besides like a person's own desire to be a self-sovereign individual and contribute to the monetary policy of Bitcoin, that's the incentive to run a node. But for mining, like there's a few incentives there. We have the block subsidy, that you could get a piece of the block subsidy that's in each block. You have the transaction fees, because when you're buying Bitcoin, you're losing because you have to pay the transaction fee. But when you're mining Bitcoin, you're benefiting from the transaction fee because you're executing the final settlement of that transaction. And then what I think a lot of people miss is the things that go past that, which would be, like you're saying, heating, which is like a positive externality of mining that people can, they don't have heat in their homes, install a Bitcoin miner, it heats their home, and they can monetize what would have otherwise just been a device providing heat is now providing heat and monetizing that energy into giving you the hardest money.
But not everywhere you need the heat. But
True, and there are many ways. Like it's not just heat. Like you could use it for drying things. Like I think I've seen a use case for a company that they dry their chocolate and they dry their beef jerky with.
I've heard about mangoes, drying wood, skins, like a lot of things.
Yeah, and just like giving a hard question would be like, what do you think? What do you think would be the variables that would incentivize more just like regular Bitcoiners to be involved in Bitcoin mining? Like the BitAxe is a good example, but that's more on the node side of things where you don't really get any monetary benefit.
It's not really on the node side. You can connect it to a pool easily, or solo or public pool.
Yeah.
But kind of the thing to mine at home, there are only two limitations. That is a 16 ampere socket, which is basically the previous model of miner, S19, which is way too loud for home mining. So you have to take into consideration only those two limitations, 16 ampere plug and noise pollution. So something in between that, there's the sweet spot that people can actually mine at home. Or it's a boiler. I think I saw some companies already offering boilers to heat homes.
Do you think we get to that point though, where like we mentioned a BitAxe isn't necessarily decentralizing hash rate? Do we get to a point where the average person in their home could contribute a significant portion of, I mean, maybe not in their home, but would there be a way for them to have access to a significant amount of hash rate to actually have meaning and make an impact?
Yeah, I'm happy to comment. I think it will be very, to come a bit back to one of your points about decentralization, so why actually decentralization matters, right? So specifically, not so much, I think we saw it once in Bitcoin where one mining pool started to create blocks that are compliant with certain jurisdictions. It's more in Ethereum, for instance, if you look at OFAC compliant blocks, as you said about the block template, and there are solutions existing or becoming more prominent, like Stratum V2, where actually miner can contribute to a pool, but also create their own block templates. It's a thing still in a very nascent stage, and there's actually one friend of mine, Alejandro from Demand, who is one of those actors who are actively working on trying to roll out specifically or encourage miners to use Stratum V2. In terms of the decentralization of hash rate, for instance, to regular individuals, I think it will be very tricky, as Jānis, you said. There is heat is not only a kind of an incentive, but it's also a problem. So, for instance, if you're not necessarily in Finland or somewhere in the north, you need to kind of manage the heat, right? If you run an S19 at about 3 kilowatts and you run it like constantly, you can't just put this in your first of all the noise, and secondly, you're gonna be your living room is gonna be very warm at some point. So I think there are companies, but I need to admit this is not necessarily my kind of area of expertise. This is more retail solutions. I think actually I would say we will see more and more concentration of hash rate geographically and also kind of company-wise, because simply mining is getting just more and more competitive. There might be kind of ideological reasons, for instance. Actually, we need to talk later because I want to buy a BitAxe as well.
So
yeah. And so I think it possibly what we see kind of people try to have an environment where, for instance, kind of it makes sense to have some sort of dedicated one miner heating solution. I guess this will be a separated product, frankly. But yeah, I see actually more and more geographical, possibly concentration going forward, as well as in terms of companies, because simply mining will become more and more, and this is a topic in itself, where, for instance, of kind of how mining looks into like 4, 8, 12 years. That's something actually I'm currently looking at, specifically as we, block subsidy is decreasing, and we're gonna.
Yeah, I mean, we can probably hit on that. We have a couple minutes left. What would you say, from all of your guys' perspective, what is like your biggest prediction, and how are you thinking about what the Bitcoin mining industry is going to look like over the next decade? 10 years from now, what is Bitcoin mining going to look like?
My honest opinion, we will have a lot of gadgets that we have Bitcoin chips in that we don't know about as a daily user. We will not be mining Bitcoin that we know about, but the companies that actually sell the gadgets will be mining Bitcoin by using your energy. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it would be the open source. Like, do you think that at the ASIC chip level and the firmware and the system level, and actually the mining pool level, do we start to see that start to separate and mining companies, maybe it goes back into the hands of the individual, or on the other side of that, what would you say?
I think
Biggest
it's
prediction
a
for Bitcoin
short-term
mining.
risk. I think all of these centralization issues are short-term risks. But I do think in the long term, if we're aware of them, because you mentioned Stratum V2 and Ocean, I think that, did you mention Ocean?
Demand. Ocean, they have their, I think, own protocol. They don't use Stratum V2, but it's kind of similar, but I'm not an expert in Ocean.
Oh, okay. So there are solutions. I do think it's a short-term risk, but I think long-term, I think we'll fix it.
Optimistic?
I am optimistic, and I think it's probably going to go through exactly what you were talking about with all the devices. I can see that happening, and I think it's definitely going to be heat reuse, and I think heat reuse is going to be the key thing.
Yeah, I think heat is definitely, we see it, for instance, with Mera in Finland and other players there. So there are some, but this is more, I guess, on the commercial side, right? But as I need to say, on the retail level, I'm frankly not an expert, so it's, but yeah, definitely in certain countries, right, where you can say, well, heat was, and I was recently at the Digital Mining Summit from Bitmain in Las Vegas, and Ben Gagnon's speech, he said, well, for instance, wood was one of the things. You can dry wood. You can kind of, if you use your air cooling, you can still use the heat. Otherwise, you can connect to a district heating system wherever it kind of fits, right? And like back in Finland, for instance, and trying to monetize this kind of still energy as well.
There's one point that I want to maybe address to the public also. We're very often mentioning and discussing decentralization or centralization of the hash rate, but we haven't actually thought about centralization of the chips. And this is where we as a manufacturer now, we feel it, the impact that we are kind of stuck with either one manufacturer or have to reverse engineer something. So we don't have enough money to build our own chip and open source it to the public. But I think companies will come soon enough.
I mean, manufacturing is at the heart of the problem, because if the manufacturer says, if you want to buy our miners, you need to use this pool, and you need to do this, and then that's a cartel monopoly mindset, where unless you fix all of the things that are involved in creating a Bitcoin miner that's creating a hash, then you're not going to fully fix the problem. But yeah, I think just wrapping up, we got 30 seconds. You guys want to, where can people find you? Where do you publish most of your work? How can they learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So very quickly, I'm on LinkedIn, X. That's pretty much it, actually. So you can find me at Alex Neumueller. And our work is being published essentially. We have a website. It's called CBCI. I don't have the can recite the link exactly from my memory. But our work is essentially accessible also via the Cambridge Judge Business School's website as well.
You can find me on Twitter, DecentraSuze, or you can type in Susie Violet Ward into Forbes, and all my articles will come up, and you can read about everything about Bitcoin, from art to the centralization of mining.
And I am from Power Mining, LinkedIn, X, whatever, website, Latvia, all basically local Europeans.
Perfect. And I'm Billy Boone on almost all social media platforms, and also have a Substack. But yeah, appreciate your guys' time. Thank you all for coming out, and hope everyone has a good rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Secure your BTC Prague 2026 ticket at the lowest possible price now.